The Bloomberg New Economy Forum has become a prime venue for discussing great global challenges, such as climate change, inequality, education, healthcare, and sanitation, and so forth. And the epicenter around the world for so many of these challenges is indeed cities, as most of the world population has already moved into cities, and millions more every single day. But we don't have solutions to these challenges at the global level. So the question is, do cities have the solutions? And if so, what are they? Can smart cities be the solutions and the approach to a progressive new global economy? We have an excellent set of panelists to discuss that question today. I'd like to begin with you, Mayor Huang. I recently visited Chongqing for the very first time, and I was so impressed by how this very large city with a fast-growing population, China's gateway to Eurasia and the new Silk Roads, has been so impeccably designed and master planned in terms of the broad avenues and distribution of construction and the verdant green space. It's also a city where you have experimented with the social credit system, with using big data as a tool of governance in terms of managing such a large population. Can you share with us the results of that process? What have you learned as the social credit system and big data have been applied to improving governance in Chongqing?
China's urbanization started 40 years ago. 40 years ago, urbanization in China was only 18.5%. Now it reached 60%, an increase of 42 percentage points. 40 years ago, we only had 260 million urban population compared with 800 million now, an increase of over 500 million. The urbanization has made a big improvement in China, which is attributable to three factors. First, China's reform and opening up has encouraged the change in the structure of labor force in rural areas. A lot of migrant workers have come to the cities. Second, the vast growth of cities needs funding. We, by the way of reform, experimented with leasing of land in batches, starting from Shanghai. Over the past 30 years, the total amount of value of land lease totaled 33 trillion RMB, which is many coming from the real estate developers. And on such land, we developed real estates such as office buildings and residential housing. The reform and opening up of China is associated with this 100 trillion RMB. Third, the governments at provincial and local levels constructed subways totaling 10,000 kilometers of subway and 100,000 kilometers of expressway, as well as 30,000 kilometers of express highway, as well as hundreds of thousands of kilometers of roads, as well as airports and other infrastructures with this 33 trillion RMB of funding. So urbanization is highly associated with the land lease and the improvement of infrastructure in urban areas. Going forward, we need to further improve urbanization and address issues and problems remaining with the urbanization process, which is reflected in the following areas. First, you may see that 60% of urbanization is referring to those with residential household registration. Well, actually, with a permanent residence. For registered household, there's only 40%. There's a gap of over 20%, meaning 300 million migrant workers do not have registered housing in the cities. They are not insured or receiving the same benefits with the urban population, which is unlike those in foreign countries. If you do not have a proper household registration in cities, you may get difficulties in sending your kids to school, having medical benefits, as well as a salary scale. So the government of China in recent years has been working very hard to reform the household registration system for migrant workers. In 2005, the government said that 200 million farmer workers need to have proper household registration in 5 years, meaning that this job must be completed by the end of next year. Then the gap between the household registration rate and the permanent residence rate in the cities will be cut from 20% to 10%. And the second is that the housing in cities should be used for living, not for speculation. Well, as we develop residential housing for the people, the housing price is on a surge. Some people and institutions and enterprises speculate on the pricing of house. According to international practice, real estates are used mainly for living instead of speculation. The Chinese government has taken measures in terms of taxation, financial, economic, investment, etc., to ensure that housing are for living instead of speculation. And third aspect is concerning urban governance. If we are not doing a good job on this work, then a lot of problems may occur. Cloud computing, big data, and smart cities are used as tools to promote urban development, such as IoT and machine-facilitated development. We are combining community service, bus service, and law and order in communities into net-based development and governance.
Thank you very much, Mayor. This is a very interesting set of comments about all of the progressive interventions that you have made in Chongqing that are also being experimented with nationally. So let's move from one of the largest megacities of Asia to the second largest city on the African continent, which is Cairo. Minister Rania, Cairo is also, as capital of Egypt, the hub for a country that also faces an enormous youth bulge, as we know, is a situation, a demographic reality across the entire Arab world. And some of the solutions that you as a government are looking at and that you're almost driving from the top down across municipalities, but especially Cairo, involve infrastructure investments such as what the mayor mentioned, but also digital technology, the tools that are in every young person's hands. So can you tell us a bit about how that is progressing in Cairo?
Thank you very much. I think for governments, everyone who's internalizing SDGs as a vision within governments' 2030 plans, 2050 plans, SDG number 11, which has to do with sustainable cities, comes really at the focal point. As you mentioned, demographics are extremely important. Today, citizens have a voice. You know, everyone sends a complaint through their mobile phone or through an app and so forth, and it becomes very important that governments internalize how data can be used to provide guidance on which private investments, public investments to do. The use of data and technology is actually a means, not necessarily an end, a means so that we can arrive at accessible, sustainable, and reliable cities where crimes are low, the congestion when it comes to moving from one place to another relates to productivity gains, etc. So I think that this use of technology, big data, is extremely important as a way to guide public investments and also guide the dialogue with private investments and international institutions which focus on infrastructure spending. So as you mentioned, in our case, the city is very congested. That's why the government has created the new capital, which is the Cairo Administrative City. It's several kilometers from Cairo, but it has the smart city features in terms of having the first vertical forests when it comes to some of the buildings that will save in terms of water, in terms of waste management, electricity. So all of these are the features, again, which create not just sustainable cities, which are SDG 11, but also decent workplace, more safety. For countries that are tourist destinations, you want to have cities which are good for their citizens, but also comfortable for the visitors. Mm-hmm. So I think this is, as the mayor had mentioned, the use of technology comes very handy. It provides guidance to countries. Also, the dialogue that is created now between citizens and the government itself on what their goals are going forward. I think all of this adds up and creates not just sustainable cities, but also a very nice governance structure for guiding cities going forward.
Mm-hmm. Mike, the mayor mentioned some of the policies around social inclusion in Chongqing, and Minister Rania mentioned the role of youth and technology, but also she mentioned the private sector and the ways in which the government wants to work more, partner more with the private sector. And here Mastercard has been critical, launching a range of initiatives that focus on social inclusion, using data, using payments, and so forth. Can you elaborate a bit on that for us?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. It's not often that you get Henry Kissinger to be your opening act, and so I'm delighted to be on this panel. Let me say you're absolutely right to be focused on that, because I think as the locus of focus shifts to cities, as cities are able to get things done when sometimes they can't get done at the national level, there's more and more of a role for the private sector to partner with cities to provide their technology, their products, and their data science capabilities. So we're actually very pleased to be working with the government of Egypt on the construction of the new capital and making sure that it's a smart city from a payments perspective as well, or to link micro businesses in Egypt with local lenders and with their suppliers, so that what used to be done in cash and therefore was invisible is now visible because it's digitized, and that allows lenders to be able to extend credit, allow small businesses that predominantly are owned by women to expand and to grow. It's about helping cities manage transit and congestion, as was mentioned. So mobility as a service, helping people get from point A to point B in the most efficient way possible, whether it's using public transportation, ride sharing, scooters, etc., and using the data capacity to be able to do that. But also something we're doing in the United States is helping mayors and governors understand the economic activity of their jurisdictions at a really micro level within a few blocks, so they can understand what the impact of investment coming into their communities really is. Is it displacing the local community? Is it giving the local community a stake in the growth of the economy? And that's awfully important, because as we've seen, the focus internationally now is really on inclusive growth. It's not enough just to have GDP growth or GDP per capita growth. We really have to look at how that growth is affecting communities if we really want to deal with some of the feelings of alienation and populism that are out there. And we think the technology and the private sector partnering with cities can be a powerful tool for that.
That is absolutely right. And I note that you said, without a hint of irony, that the way to make to make things visible is by digitizing them and moving away from cash, but such it is. Chairman Yu, we have to build with all of these challenges in mind around social inclusion, and we have to build thinking about what the latest technologies are that can facilitate our goals around having an inclusive new economy. So as the chairman of Vanke, can you tell us a bit about how you are incorporating some of this thinking into the real estate developments, both in China and internationally, that you are leading?
Thank you. Well, urbanization brings economic development, and the secret behind it is that with the cluster of population, it reduces transaction cost, increasing business efficiency and the forms of businesses. As a result, innovation is more possible. And from this perspective, the larger the city is, the better. But actually, urbanization brings large city disease. And one of the symptoms is this, that is, housing, home prices, which have become impediments for the growth of cities and for the growth of the competitiveness of cities. If housing prices are too high, impeding the inflow of young people, then the city will not have a good future. And today, many cities in China, the major cities, face such issues. How can a city accommodate more young people? And is it possible to solve this problem? Well, let's look at international examples. Take a look at Tokyo. Tokyo is the largest metropolitan area in the world with a population of 38 million. They have addressed the population housing issue very well. For instance, in Tokyo, for each household, they have about 1.17 home, and each Tokyo resident has about 1.7 rooms. So they have addressed the housing problem very nicely. And so that's housing prices issue. And in Tokyo, in the center of Tokyo, if there's a rail transit within 1 kilometer, then the prices are at a certain level. Within a 30-minute radius is about 30,000 RMB. This prices, if you put it in Beijing, Shanghai, or Shenzhen, is unimaginable. So how could Chongqing deliver that, or Tokyo deliver that? I think there are three things that we can learn from Tokyo. First, Tokyo has continued to increase the efficiency for land development, and the percentage of housing, land for housing, and 60% of the land have been used for development, of which residential housing is about 70%. In China, in large cities, Shenzhen has a development rate about 46%, Shanghai about 30%. In Beijing and Guangzhou, the rate is less than 10% in terms of development efficiency, and of which residential building accounts for no more than 30%. So in these cities with the major inflow of population, if you look at their housing supply and land supply is quite inadequate. And secondly, in terms of rail transit, Tokyo is doing railroad. It addressed the mobility issue presented by living in a scattered manner, and it give up the approach of private cars. It provides public transit, rail transit. In Tokyo, there are about 2,400 kilometers of rail tracks, and every day 35 million trips are made, and rail transit accounts for over 90% of the mobility every day, and compared to that, China lags far behind. And thirdly, along the rail tracks, they have been conducting comprehensive development. The rail transit not only provides a mobility solution, it is also the lines where cities grow. And along the rail tracks, there's very intensive communities with offices, with malls, residential areas where you can, and also places where you can spend your money. So you can commute from A to B, and also it can actually address the issue of living, working, and consumption. So from this perspective, actually, in terms of rail transit and the housing development along the rail transit, we can learn from Tokyo. So Tokyo is a good inspiration for us. If Tokyo can address the issue, then I believe large cities in China can also address these issues. Despite the Tokyo solution is not completely replicable, but the direction is worth learning. Compared with Tokyo, actually the modernization process of Chinese cities is rather short. We have enough time and space and opportunities to address the living issue, a housing issue in a large city. I hope that in the near future, the young people in major cities in China can afford a home and also live very comfortably. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chairman. What's so interesting about what you said is that you have embodied this notion that cities can learn from each other. You've cited the example of Tokyo and other places that have solved some of these major challenges around issues like optimizing land usage, transportation, and so forth. And so cities learning from each other, Minister Rania, is a critical thing. And as in Cairo, as you look around the world and are looking for best practices to bring into Cairo, how important is that, and what are some of the cities or city examples and practices that have been the most relevant for Cairo? And Mike, I'd love to ask you as well as we wind down, in terms of your cross-border experiences, what are the cities that have that have become the best role models for leveraging the private sector and some of your initiatives for social inclusion?
If I put it in a multilateral context, the United Nations World Tourism Organization, for example, just had a very big event on cities, smart cities, and how that affects tourism destinations. And again, emphasizing that there's shared learning that can happen, and also how the digital tool can provide guidance to governments when it comes to how to do the investments. In the case of the region, if you take a look around, we find that Dubai is one of the very important cities that has been able to reduce crime very much using digitalization, using, even in the airports, the way people come in and out is also quite remarkable. So I think there are lessons learned within the region that definitely can help and provide guidance. So I think also the increased discussion now on the importance of focusing on cities, not just because they should be tidy and nice, but how they have economic impact related to productivity gains, better quality of life, and also aspirations of citizens when it comes to diversity of jobs that they can actually engage in when the city is actually a smarter city.
That's right. So, Mike?
Well, we've organized a network around something called City Possible, where we have several dozen cities that have come together because mayors are among the most pragmatic people in the world. They are looking for solutions, and they're all facing similar challenges. And so this network, one city or another will take charge of going after a solution and then sharing the results with the other. And it's been a terrific opportunity for best practice sharing. Europeans, Latin Americans, U.S., Middle East, Asian, and the like, all facing similar issues. But I would say one more thing, and it goes back to, not surprising, trade a little bit, which is as our economies become more and more services-oriented, I think even the locus of trade discussions may shift a bit. When you're talking about the trade in goods, it comes down to tariffs, which are the provenance of national governments. But when you talk about services, oftentimes that's regulated at the local and state level. E-commerce, whether you allow architects or engineers or doctors or lawyers from another country to practice in your jurisdiction. And my sense is that cities have a lot to be gained by talking to each other about how they might break down barriers to each other that at a time when there's friction at the national level.
Great point. So we vested a lot of confidence in the role of cities, so much so that there is a joke out there in the cities discourse, which is, the city is the solution. Now what's the problem? But I think that this has been a very positive, practical, and progressive discussion because we have talked about a lot of what the actual tangible solutions are that we're hearing coming out of cities and cities learning from each other, more so than we're getting from the multilateral conversation right now. So I think that in that sense, we definitely have hit upon the right locus of solution, which is the city. I want to thank our panelists for providing such very, very appropriate and timely insights to this discourse. And please, everyone, join me in thanking the panelists for their contribution. Thank you.